30 years now, and I started in Portland, Oregon. I'm from Seattle, Washington was where I was born, but I moved to Portland to go to art school, and became familiar with the work of Will Vinton, the clay animator in that town. And in the 80s, the scene was so much less commercial than it is now. There was very little TV production. The 80s was about as low as it got in terms of good animation. It was a real low point. And TV, they were only kind of doing cartoon shows about toys like G.I. Joe or My Little Pony. And so when I started out, there was hardly any of this stuff going on. I found a job in Portland, Oregon, working for Will Vinton, making claymation. And we did stuff that is now 30 years old, like the California Raisins and the Domino's Pizza Noid. But the thing that brought me to Los Angeles was Pee-wee's Playhouse, which came on in the later 80s after I'd been working for Will for about 5 years in Oregon. And so I had a lot of claymation experience by then. And Pee-wee's show had a bunch of claymation and other kinds of independent shorts. If you haven't seen Pee-wee's Playhouse, I highly recommend it. It's a very cool show, live action show that makes fun of kids' cartoon shows. When I was little, we would come home after school and there'd be like a cartoon show that would be like a local one they made, for like in Seattle, there were a couple of them. So kids could come home after school and watch old Bugs Bunny cartoons on, and Pee-wee's show kind of made fun of that, but it also was super high. It was like the creators had all done LSD, and it was really a crazy show. And this is the 80s was a weird time. So I came to LA to work on Penny. I was thrilled to be part of that. I did the Penny cartoons, and I just stayed here. I've now been in LA for more than 30 years because this is such a lively town. There's so much going on. And my timing was perfect. The Nicktoons started in the next couple of years after I'd gotten here and I'd worked for Pee-wee. Then I met the people at Klasky Chupo that created Rugrats. And I was there for the first season of that as a story editor. And so I worked on Rugrats to kind of get it started. That gave me the chance to meet everybody at Nick. And then I got to make Hey Arnold, which I pitched to them in 93. And it ran from 95 to 2002. So it was like the biggest job of my life. And then when that was over, things got really slow for a while. And I was really shocked because I thought, oh, once you've made a show and it works, don't you get to just make your next show and your next, and they just let you do whatever you want? But it wasn't so. It's a very, cruel world of, it's a very commercial world where everything is driven by money, and you have to hope that you can kind of hit against, like striking it rich. And so it took me several more years. And I finally pitched Dinosaur Train to PBS, and that was great. We worked on it. We've been working on it for 12 years. I'm still doing podcast episodes of Dinosaur Train, but we made 100 half hours of that. So that went all through the last 12 years. And in the middle of that, I also did another show for them called Ready, Jet, Go, which is another very similar model to the Dinosaur Train show in that we started off making 80 episodes for them. So it's like a huge order to make a preschool show that has science curriculum. And so I've made little kid stuff, and I've made kind of medium age kid stuff, and not a lot of adult stuff, but that's been my career. I love cartoons. As soon as I saw them, as a kid, Saturday morning cartoons on TV and after school cartoons on TV, they showed the classics. They showed the Warner Brothers cartoons from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, which are, in my mind, still the funniest animation there is. And
100%, yeah.
And that taught all of us, my generation, and I'm sure all other generations that have had a chance to see it, they taught all of us our idea of comedy and of comic timing. And they sell a joke. If you watch a 40s Warner cartoon and the way they sell a joke, there's nothing better. There's nothing finer has been done since then. I mean, I think there's a lot of really wonderful stuff going on now. I love the modern era of cartoons where weird new stuff will be coming out on all the streamers. It's a big booming market, and in recent years I've seen some really incredible new animation. So it's not like it isn't good now, but if you want to see where all my comedy came from, and where I think most cartoon comedy comes from. Yeah, just watch the Warner cartoons. And then I also saw, what can I say? I saw the Charlie Brown specials in the 60s that as they came out. And I thought I was really, really influenced by the Charlie Brown aesthetic when I made Hey Arnold. What else? I saw all the Disney features as a kid. They came out in the theaters, and I'd go see them one by one. So I saw a lot of animation as a kid, and I did want to be an animator. I think it wasn't until college that I realized I could pursue the career. I started out I studied fine art, but yeah, I wanted to make cartoons. No doubt. It's really cool. That's the most fun thing about making the work now to me is that I was making that in the 90s, and I was making it for you when you were a kid, but I couldn't kind of there was no give and take between us. There wasn't like a social media, and even the internet was kind of in its infancy. And so the idea of like people going online and chatting about what they were seeing and tweeting about what they think of it was just, in its infancy and wasn't really happening. Also, as adults, all of you are now of the age where you totally participate, you write and you react, and some of you make art, and some of you make music, and some of you want to be journalists and stuff. And so now I get this incredible feedback for the work that I made in the 90s that I couldn't get then, Well, that's a great question, because it's a long time ago, but I've been actually thinking of it because I just hit that landmark where I realized I've been working for since 1980. Is it 40? Yeah, I've been 33 years in LA, and I've been 40 years as an animator. And those first 5 years were working for Will Vinton, and it was super good. It was like we were working in film. We were shooting on 35 millimeter film with these really old Mitchell cameras that shot one frame at a time. They had a great, the mechanism inside the Mitchells was very steady. It was kind of the go-to camera for 35 millimeter stop motion animation. And now all that technology is completely gone, right? And when we were doing it though, that was the way you did it. There was no digital. We didn't have any kind of digital storage system where you could, take a frame of what you just shot and then be able to run it and examine it. Any of that kind of analysis wasn't happening yet. And it was like the dark ages. And but what was cool about that was it was goes back to the very beginnings of the technology of stop motion animation. It was at that point it hadn't evolved into digital at all, and so it was like a filmmaking apprenticeship for me. I loved it. I got the job as a 24-year-old, and they taught me everything. They taught me how to build sets, how to make modeling clay, how to build we welded together these metal armatures for the insides of the clay figures. And we covered everything. Will's aesthetic was his claymation world, everything should be covered with clay. So unless it was maybe the background in the very furthest back and it was painted on wood or something, the foreground stuff all was literally covered with clay. And we would melt that plasticine in double boiler pots on a little stove and pour it out in liquid form. And that's how all those walls were done. Imagine that, just like the entire thing was made out of basically melted clay. And the figures were made out of the very same stuff. And we modeled them one frame at a time with little dental tools. And it was really the coolest job ever. When I'd been making Rugrats for about a year, Mary Harrington was the boss of the Nicktoons on the West Coast. She was the big Nickelodeon executive. Mary had opened a studio on Ventura Boulevard where they were making Rocco. And it was when Rocco was a new show. And we all heard about that. And we heard Mary was taking pitches. And so we said, yeah, let's take our ideas to Mary and make sell them a Nicktoon. And we went in to meet with Mary, and there were 6 of us, and we were all going to be partners on it, and we were going to all co-create these show ideas. And Mary didn't like that idea. She's like, "What do you mean that 6 of you are going to be the creative? Like, who's in charge?" And we didn't really even know, because we were all just like writer guys from Rugrats. And she was kind of basically said no thanks to all our ideas. And so we were now kind of just sitting there in the meeting wasn't, it was like it could be over if she'd wanted it to, but she was really nice. She was like, sit around, and she had put out a plate of food for us and said, let's just hang out, talk about things we like. And one of the guys in the group said, Craig, show Mary your penny cartoons. And I had them on a sample reel. Like I had a little VHS tape that had all my early Arnold stuff on it and the penny cartoons. And sure enough, Arnold was the first thing on there. And I forgot that. But when I put it on, Arnold came on. It was Arnold Escapes from Church, the little 2-minute claymation piece. It was my Arnold debut. And Mary's like, what? Who's this? What is this? And I'm like, oh, he's Arnold. And she's like, God, this is great. And when the tape finished, she said, do you have any other Arnold stuff? And I had an Arnold comic in the back, in my little briefcase, from Simpsons Magazine, Simpsons Illustrated Magazine, because Matt Groening had let me put Arnold comics on the back of each issue. And there was a particular drawing in that comic that Mary just laughed and laughed. She's like, this is great. Let's do this. And the other guys that were at the meeting were just like, fuck. They're like, oh, so Craig's going to sell her a show. And then we the group, we all broke up and headed out, and Mary stopped me in the hall and said, yeah, come back and bring me that Arnold guy. Let's make something about that Arnold guy. So I was thrilled. I was like, wow, out of the blue, Mary wants to do this character in something. And it was wide open as that. Isn't that funny? It's like, I like this guy. What have you got? And that's actually the way I've heard similar stories about 90s pitches. Ren and Stimpy, John Kay had shown, it was Vanessa Coffey, who was Mary's boss in the New York office. John had shown her he had a bunch of pitches.
Yeah.
But there was a cat and a dog in the back of one. She's like, who are they? And he's like, it's Ren and Stimpy. And she's like, can you do something with them? And it was literally like that. Like, well, yeah. And you go, of course you're going to say yes. You're not going to say, no, I can't think of anything. So it was exactly that. I was like, okay, Mary wants me to come back and show her a show based on this Arnold guy. And so I literally just went home and went, how about I'll pitch that he lives in a boarding house with his crazy grandparents and a bunch of eccentric boarders, and there'll be a freeway overpass over the boarding house. And that's all I had. I went into her with this drawing that was just that, like the boarding house and the freeway overpass, and Grandma and Arnold are standing on the bottom of the stoop. And I said, something like this. And Mary really liked it. I mean, when I think about it now, there was very little obstacles in the way of Arnold turning into a TV show from there. We made a pilot in a couple months. We started a pilot, which I wrote with Joanne Salbeher and Steve Vixton, my writing team, when we got the show picked up. And so they kind of helped me develop the series in that way. They helped. That's why at the end of the head credits, it always says developed by me and Joe and Steve. And that's what they did for the next, that was 94 summer. I made the pilot in the spring and so they wrote that script with me. And I met Tucker a few years before that. He was a key person. I had already made a few films with Jim Lang, the music composer, who is Jim's, at this point, people who grew up on it like you, people are as nuts about Jim Lang's music as any other aspect of Hey Arnold. So that was, that kind of weird, lucky thing where I was around these people. We'd worked on stuff together. Again, everybody had come. Joe had come to Hollywood from somewhere else. Steve had come from, Steve was from Nevada. Joe was from, Sacramento. Jim Lang came from Kansas City. I mean, all these people just came to LA to pursue cartoon making or whatever. Jim came to pursue he wanted to be a songwriter. Yeah, I really do think that's true about life. And in terms of careers, it's been my experience that I didn't really have much of a plan except just a huge desire to do stuff, like vaguely to make cartoons and to kind of tell stories. And then the rest of it was just like lucky breaks where I happened to be in the right place at the right time. And so it seems to me the only takeaway is you should just be ready. You know what I mean? Like have an intention, something that you want to do, and then be ready when an opportunity presents itself to just jump and go. Like, for example, if I'd have been like, I don't know, I'm a little busy to go to LA and do the penny cartoons. I'm having a good time in Oregon. Why should I, put myself out, take a chance? Then none of this would have happened, right? So I feel really lucky that when the opportunities came, I just said, yeah, I knew when I got that offer to come do the penny cartoon, I was like, yeah. Same with Rugrats. When Paul Germain said, do you want to come and work on this new Nicktoon? I said, yeah, absolutely. Of course I do. Now, there's more structure in place to keep truly wacky, spontaneous stuff from happening. And in the 90s, when we were doing it, I had a lot of attention focused on me in my first season of Hey Arnold, where they were giving me a lot of notes and they were asking hard questions like, well, what is this? Well, who is Arnold? Why are kids going to care about this? They would ask those kind of questions just in their kind of nervousness to make sure that the show would be good. And that kind of anxiety comes from before you have the evidence of a bunch of episodes. And so the best thing that could happen for me was just to get through that very difficult first few months of production and get those episodes done and made, and we could look at them. But it took all that first year. We started, they ordered a season of 20 half hours of Hey Arnold in 1995. So in January we started. It wasn't until almost the end of the year. Man, I guess it was the fall, but a lot of time had gone by with a lot of this sort of anxiety about what it was going to be. And then we got our first episode back, which was Downtown is Fruits and Eugene's Bike. And that cartoon, it was funny and people liked it. And it was like, phew, and then the next ones that followed, the first half dozen Hey Arnold half hours in those first 12 stories, this is a pretty good sampling of what the show is going to be. And then it was easy. I could go, well, look at these, you're laughing, this is, the music's cool, there's the funny stuff happens. There seem to be jokes and so on. Then they kind of lightened up. And then after a couple of years, they really lightened up. So by the time I did season 3 and 4 and 5, they were barely paying attention. And that's compared to now, the amount of attention that gets paid to every episode of TV that I've worked on in the last 10 years, it was kind of extraordinary. And I can't even explain why we were so lucky, but here's my theory. Hey Arnold was not crazy like Ren and Stimpy, and it wasn't going off the rails, and it was grounded, and it was kind of about reality, and it had a lot of kind of realistic stuff going on. It was really a show about emotions. It was an emotional theme about what it felt like to be a kid. And there wasn't anything about that freaked out Nickelodeon. In fact, they felt good about it. They were like, oh, well, okay. Craig's he's not going to do decapitation jokes, and, it won't be crazy. And so then they could just relax and worry about other stuff. So they just left me alone for the last kind of 2/3 of the series. And so I think that really allowed us to have a kind of a free hand in our storytelling. But in terms of like the first half of your question, where you were asking about the tone being much more grounded than the early Nicktoons and stuff that followed too, it's just the way I just chose to go. I just thought the way I can be different from the other shows that are in production. I just wanted, all of us, I'm sure, just wanted our shows to be unique and kind of have their own corner where they, and I was like, well, we'll specialize in that kind of slightly bummed out, melancholy take on bluesy, jazzy take on reality. And it's funny because it's kids, right? But Charlie Brown had done it, man. If Charlie Brown Christmas, I hope you've all seen a Charlie Brown Christmas.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
From 1965. That cartoon's sublime. It's like the music that Vince Guaraldi jazz is just heavenly, and it's very melancholy. So you can see, if you watch that, you can kind of see where young me as a kid, I saw that when it was a new cartoon when it came out. I was Charlie Brown's age when it came out, and I was like, oh my God, I can tell a story that's about feeling, and specifically about how often we're kind of feeling bad, right? Childhood isn't all happy. It's actually kind of melancholy. and there's not much you can do about it. And so I thought, if I kind of took that part of the turf, then that could be my area to kind of make my own kind of cartoon. And nobody else was doing it. They were like the other Nicktoons were much more, funny and wacky, and shit blowing up. And I love that stuff. I think that's fine. But I just kind of feel like our superpower was to be kind of blue, kind of sad. Really fun. I mean, the thing that I love best about my work is just that. Like, you go, we get to make a whole world here. We made that pilot. The pilot was only a 8-minute pilot. And yet I was like, I was going to tell all that story. In the original pilot, Arnold, he accidentally beans Harold in a street ball game. Harold's going to kill him. Helga says, wait, give him 24 hours to live, and we'll, let him dangle. And then, think about what he did. And really it's so she can spend the night giving him a countdown of how many hours he has left to live. And because she's obsessed with him, which we discover in that pilot. But in a little 8-minute cartoon, all these things are going to happen. And you get to, Jim and I talking about, we'd been working on projects together. It was about our 4th or 5th project by that time. So we were friends, and we had a good, easy language about musical, how we were going to score something. I could talk to him about the kind of feelings I would like it to have. And Jim, he's a miracle. The guy's actually, of all the people I've worked with, I think Jim's stuff is kind of the most miraculous of all, because I watch him do it. He does it very fast, and he doesn't really have to go back and redo hardly at all. And for me as an artist, we're coming from a place where we might do drawings and wrinkle them up and do another and wrinkle it up, do another. And you look at Jim, just like, boom, he just lays it out. It's kind of perfect. And he was, we talked about it. We talked about all this stuff. We were like, well, I love Vince Guaraldi and his jazz for Charlie Brown. I think that's really, it's so powerful. It's a really cool way to depict childhood to me. But I was like, yeah, but we can't do that. If we did Vince Guaraldi, we'd just be ripping off Peanuts. And so what can we do? We love jazz. And I particularly loved, at that time, I was listening to a lot of Miles Davis. And I would say, muted trumpets. And he said, well, I've been listening to this acid jazz on KCRW. The LA's got a great, public radio station that plays really good jazz. And at that time, they were playing a lot of acid jazz, which was hip hop beats with traditional jazz instruments playing over it, sax and trumpet and stuff like that. And I was like, yeah, that would be fantastic. And so he came up with the Arnold sound, which was a kind of a hip hop groove that, if you listen to the beats, they're usually these cool kind of sampled sounds. He likes to use a lot of noise, and so it sounded instantly cool. And he got a bunch of his favorite horn players that he had done session work with, and they were sort of the Arnold band, and they played all through those first 100 half hours. It's like the same crew. The horn player, Bill Liston, plays all the reeds, and he's all through it. Nick Kurgo plays the guitar. That's the end credit music, and it's on the main title. And if you listen through the show, Nick Kurgo's playing guitar kind of through the whole thing. And it's the sound. There's a soundtrack, by the way, if you're record vinyl collectors, there's a Hey Arnold soundtrack that we put out a couple of years ago that features all of the best of, it's volume 1, but yeah, for aficionados of Jim's music, that's a great album. Yeah, the demographic change was interesting because there's a vibe. Cartoons for kids 6 to 11 get to do different things. And so Hey Arnold had a much more grown-up vibe, and it was a little more scary. And I feel like preschool, even though PBS, I really like them. I think that their idea of making sure that kids learn a bunch of things before kindergarten is basically the goal. And so we were teaching, earth science and paleontology and Dinosaur Train and earth science and astronomy and Ready, Jet, Go. It's good. Kids learn a lot, and it made me happy to think of kids geeking out on dinosaurs. It was as interesting to me as me geeking out on jazz or cartoons or something like that. I geeked out on dinosaurs too, and so I knew it would kids would love it. But the difference is you have to you're in a more of a intentionally happy place. I mean, the vibe of Dinosaur Train is very upbeat, and that's because you're making something for small kids. And the vibe of Hey Arnold is kind of downbeat, and so that was a difference, and it affected all the things we do. It affects the way we write, and it was cool. It was kind of a new craft to learn as far as I was concerned, and the science especially. Both my PBS shows, I've learned a ton of science. I'm really that aspect of it where because of the requirements of your job that you have to learn new stuff, that keeps your brain flexible. I'm really glad.
And hey, nice to meet you, Mr. Bartlett.
Hi.
I said I wasn't going to ask a question because I'm way too nervous. My heart's beating really fast. But first off, I just want to say thank you, because Hey Arnold to me is like my relaxing show. Like if I'm ever having anxiety or going through a really bad time, I put on an episode of Hey Arnold and it calms me down immediately. And I owe a lot of credit to that as well to Jim Lang, because he did all the music. And you mentioned before the vinyl releases. I actually have 2 copies. I listen to it a lot. So I guess my question would be that there's a lot of songs in the Hey Arnold show itself that are not released anywhere. And I just wanted to know if there's a vault somewhere that has all of the rest of those songs that haven't been released that can one day be released.
Well, we are going to make a volume 2 if we can get Nick to get up off their ass and make a deal with us. But so yeah, volume 2 will contain an equal number of songs, and that'll be a one way to get them. The other thing I would recommend is reach out to Jim Lang. He's on Spotify. He's on SoundCloud, I think, is his. And just drop him a note and say, hey, I'm looking for such and such. And if he doesn't have it, I'd be amazed.
Yeah, I emailed Jim Lang a couple months ago asking if he had a few tracks, and he never got back to me. So you're the next best thing. But
what songs are you looking for?
Specifically the one from the first 14 seconds of the episode called Operation Ruthless.
Oh my God.
Operation Ruthless.
Yeah.
I'll look for it and ask him.
Thank you so much. That honestly would make my life.
Operation Ruthless, man. Operation Ruthless. Let's take a minute for that. That's a cartoon that the ending of Operation Ruthless, we were about, 5 or 6 episodes in by then. And that incredibly sad ending where Helga is left all by herself as punishment for the terrible things she did is when I saw that, I was like, oh, damn, man, let's make more shows like this. This is really cool.
It's incredible. I think that specifically that ending too is one of the key points that sold me on the show, because it just really gives you a second to reflect on everything that just happened. And then also, Jim Lang and the saxophone and all that. But
it's
thank
great.
You so much.
It's great music. Thank you. You bet. I'll see if he knows where that track is.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Okay, you too.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good.
So my name is Katie. I'm really into things like illustration and concept design. So I love Hey Arnold from the perspective that it kind of was able to mesh a whole bunch of city inspiration together. I know you kind of took elements of Seattle and other cities that you've been a part of and meshed them together. But one thing that I know that stands out to a lot of the Hey Arnold fandom is Arnold's bedroom in the boarding house. And I was just wondering, that phenomenal skylight and everything that's in there. I was just wondering how you came up with the idea for that and what your reaction was when there was kind of that outpouring of people just appreciating that space, particularly in the Hey Arnold show.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. I think that's a really good example of why I even do it, man. The payoff of people responding. The thing I like best is trying to kind of guess how people will like. What will people like if I do this? Kids will dig that for the following reasons, and partly we kind of tell you that, the episode. Sometimes Helga explains Arnold to the audience in a way that Arnold himself never has to. Arnold never has to say he's cool. That would be very not like him. So it's great that you kind of have Helga tell the audience, and then as an adult, I would see adult people who'd seen it as a kid saying what they liked about it, and I'd be, God, this is so spooky, because I used to tell my boss, Mary, it's going to be okay. She'd be like, when things were kind of at their worst at the start of the show, and she'd say, I don't know, who is this Arnold guy? What's his deal? And I said, don't worry, Mary. Helga will tell the audience over and over again and then they'll think, well, he must be cool because Helga thinks he's so cool, and they'll learn that, and then they'll say it back. And so that was that aspect of making something. I wanted Arnold to have a dreamy room. I wanted everything about, like, when I was a kid, my cousins lived up in upstate Washington, and I'd go up to where they lived in the kind of in the country, and they had an big old house, and an attic that had a staircase that pulled down like that from a little cord, and you went up these little tiny skinny stairs into the attic room, and that was my cousin's bedroom. And I thought, I want Arnold to have a really dreamy bedroom in the boarding house, because he's obviously got some bad stuff going on. Like he's an orphan kid, really, apparently. Like, you don't really know from the series until Parents' Day, 60 shows in, you realize, oh, his parents have gone missing. But, so he's kind of like an orphan. He's being raised by his super cool grandparents, but you still kind of would feel bad for him. Arnold doesn't have his mom and dad. And so I thought, let's say he's got a really awesome attic room that is like dreamy, like my dad was an architect, and I loved house design. I was really into that. And I think that's why the boarding house is so kind of detail specific, and the city is so site specific, is because I grew up with my dad doing floor plans and stuff. And so I wanted the boarding house to be like a place that had 2 floors, but like an insane number of rooms, and kind of magical realism too, where there's more rooms than could really go in that house.
Yeah.
At the same time, like in the one remember the one where Helga sneaks in to get the recording back? That had the crazy shit. It had a dumbwaiter, and then it had like a crawl space above the second floor thing. And then she got into the wall behind his fold out couch and flipped in. All that stuff was like, I was like, kids will fucking love this.
Yeah.
They will love this. They'll want that room. And I, my very first drawings of the boarding house, I had that in mind. And so the very first drawing that I did for Mary, that I kind of brought in to sell the show, had the boarding house. It had the little skylight attic visible. And then as each iteration of and by the time we got to series, we drew it over and over and made it much more kind of, the show ended up being more kind of like locked in. It had more, the architecture was more real and specific. And so I kind of figured it all out by the time we got to series. I put the attic down at the end of the hall, as far away from the front door as you could get. And that I made sure that it had the sloping wall with the little steps so that he could open up a skylight window and go onto the attic roof. And even though he doesn't do it very often, he does it a couple times in the whole series. But the idea was implied that Arnold could climb out of his attic and go down this fire escape and go hang out and do things in the middle of the night. Even though, like I said, we only showed it a couple times. It was heavily implied. And I really wanted kids to go, damn, if I was Arnold, I would live in the coolest room ever, and it would have this skylight view all the time. And if I wanted to go out day or night, I could just come and go. And it was meant to be like the ultimate freedom scenario. This is a 9-year-old kid, but he's living like a swinging 25-year-old, he has apparently has a cool jazz collection of records, and has a cool sound system. And people have asked me, they've been like, well, doesn't that mean they have to have a lot of money? And I was like, nah, Grandma and Grandpa did that. They kind of fixed up that room for him once his parents were gone and wanted him to have this.
Yeah.
And like Grandma and Grandpa helped him make that remote control couch, and the stereo is all like junk they got from, the junk store.
Right.
And it was just my fantasy. Like, they don't really have money, but Arnold gets to live like this little kind of super cool
collage together into this cool
wonderful. Yeah. So it was really just like because I got this chance to make a cartoon, and at apparently a particularly light-handed time in cartoon making history, when Nickelodeon gave us the money to do it, but they didn't stop us from doing what we wanted to do. It was a lot of fighting in the first season. There was a lot of it was like a brawl.
Yeah.
There were a lot of egos. I'd hired a really great crew, but they were all everyone had an opinion,
Mhm.
and we'd fight and fight. And luckily it came out okay. And I think that's the trick. If you make a finished product that's good enough, then they'll let you keep going. So obviously we managed to get along enough to get it done.
Yeah.
But anyway, I hope that answers your question.
Does. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hi.
Hey.
I was just wondering, was there any other like cartoon during that late 90s to early 2000s and Nickelodeon other than Hey Arnold that you would like watch and be like, dang, like that's so good, and like take ideas from it?
I mean, luckily there's always been something new that I would see, and I'd be like, exactly that. And SpongeBob, when it came out in I want to say 99 we went on TV in 97, but we started in 95. At that time, Steve Hillenburg was developing SpongeBob. And when it came out, I saw it and I was like, it's going to be an instant hit. I saw the pilot and I was like, this is going to be a hit, man. Kids are going to go nuts for this. And I didn't even have any idea how much they would, because the difference between Hey Arnold and SpongeBob is, I got paid fine to make it for all the years that I made it, but it wasn't like it made me rich. And SpongeBob made Steve Hillenburg like rich. They sold like $1 billion worth of consumer products in those first 10 years. And so everybody associated with SpongeBob, made a bunch of money. So I mean, that's not to equate why it was a good show. I mean, I think it was just like kind of a smash, it did really well. And then, over the years, as shows come out, once in a while, I'll see something I just think is like, oh, that's something new, like Adventure Time. When Adventure Time came on, I was like, oh, great. Now we have a whole new kind of funny and kind of world. And people like a new audience will emerge that likes this kind of stuff. Rick and Morty made me feel that way too. Like I was like, this is really funny and kind of smart and dark, and like all three of those shows are quite different from me, but I think that's why I liked them. They were another whole other way of looking at stuff. All the early Nicktoons really got to be their own weird thing, It felt like later things got a little more kind of what you'd expect, but like SpongeBob came out of nowhere. I was really like, wow. And Steve worked kind of quietly for a couple of years. He was just there in the same building as us. He had a little office, and I'd rarely see him. He'd be in there drawing away, making his little world under the sea. I was like, I can't wait to see that. There's always been something going on. Or Simpsons. When Simpsons first came out, it was so funny. You'd sit there on a Sunday night and watch it when each new episode would come out and just laugh and laugh. I was like, damn, I know I'm trying to be funny. I'm really trying to make Arnold a funny show, but man, I can't touch this. This shit's great. Yeah. Anyway, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
I'll just sit here. So mine, I guess, is a little bit more of like a broader question. I was just wondering, like, for the writing aspect of all your shows, like, how do you get into that workflow? Like, I find it a lot easier to get into workflow like character design rather than like the writing.
Yeah, everybody's the nice thing about creating a show is that everybody gets to do it kind of the way they want. That's been my experience, that some people come at it, it could be somebody comes at it and all they want to do is character design, and they go, if I design all the characters, then the show, that'll be the most important thing to me, that the show has that look of these characters that I've designed. And others, all they want to do is write. And the shows even get created by people who are writers. They come from it as TV writers. People can come at it from live action. What was I just saying? Rick and Morty, the guy from Community. Yeah, right? Yeah, the guy from Community created Rick and Morty. He's a writer. He found some artists and said, draw me up this world. This is what I want. And it doesn't mean he's not qualified to make a great show. Rick and Morty's a great show. And so you don't have to have all the skills in the kind of toolbox. And in fact, it's a rare thing where somebody does kind of everything. And I think, and it's great that since it's such a collaborative medium, it takes so many people to make a cartoon show. Not as many as it used to. Like when I made Hey Arnold, we had 50 people. All the shows did. And when I made the PBS shows, we had more like 15. And that just shows the kind of attrition of the economy and kind of having to make more out of less and the technology changing and stuff. But the point is there's usually a big crew. And if you have people to collaborate with, why not like hire artists that are better than you? Well, that's what I did, man. I had background painters and stuff. I was like, damn, man, I can't paint like that. And I think I can kind of hold my own as an artist, and I have a visual style and I can kind of do stuff. But I'm happy to collaborate with people who help and take on the other parts of the work. That, and also it's just like whatever makes you kind of happiest. If you are unhappy writing the scripts, it's like, oh God, this is not, I'm not getting the happiness from doing this work. That all the better, just hire someone to do the writing and you work on the art. But I like to, when I got into making Hey Arnold, I ended up concentrating on the writing just because it felt like the place for me where the story kind of went like, and it would be when you'd written the script and then you went to record it with the actor and the actor said the lines for you and you heard that radio play of them acting out your scene. That would be like, there it is right there. And that would be my area to work on. And I would we'd take those tape and go to sit with the editor, and the editor would cut together the radio play into like a 10 minutes and change tape that we would then give to the artist and they would draw it. And that was my like area of control. I would like make it just so, and then hand it to the storyboard artist and listen to it with them and talk about the scenes and how they were going to draw it. That's really different from other cartoons, man. A lot of cartoons are written in storyboard where that's all they do. They draw it and they kind of pose it out and then they kind of write dialogue under it as they go based on like a slim little outline of what would happen. And me, I'm like, no, man, you got to write up a script. It's 20 some pages long. It describes everything. And the artist then listen to the track, read the script, and draw the thing as I planned it. And some artists kind of chafe at that and go, hey, man, I want to be part of that story creation. And I go, well, there's lots of different ways to make a cartoon. And but I and so even though I love to draw and I love to make art, I'm really mostly here at my computer writing and kind of handing it out to other people to draw. So it's nice. It's really the nature of things that you get to kind of concentrate on what you're best at, what makes you happiest, I'd say. So, if you're feeling like I wish I was better at writing, write as much as you can. I love to read other people. I do a lot of reading because I think it's like, the more and reading other screenplays is very useful for learning how to write in that format. So if you want to kind of get better at it, go for it. But if you're feeling like not for me, don't feel bad, because there's like, it's that the work is actually quite specialized.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thanks.
No problem.
To the plate. The question I had earlier, you were mentioning when you were first pitching Hey Arnold to Mary that you showed her like that she was like part of a comic strip that you wrote. Did the Hey Arnold show, like, did you base it off of that comic strip, or did you like have to change it for TV?
No, I mean, it really changed. I mean, it went through a hilarious amount of change. If you, I'm on Instagram. If you flip back a couple months, I think it was like, I kind of went through, when I realized I'd been doing this for 40 years, I started there when I got that job at Will Vinton's and did the claymation. And then I got the Pee Wee job and I came to LA, and then that work ended. And I started making the first Arnold short in clay. And then I had showed Mary that first drawing. And then, then I made the pilot. And if you look at all that trip that it took, geez, it changes hilariously. Arnold changes so much that it's hardly the same thing. And I think that's okay. Like, I guess it could be kind of embarrassing. Like, man, it took me a while to sort it out. But I just think that's just the nature of it. If you look at a lot of like the kind of history of some favorite thing, like Bugs Bunny, for example, if you look at the very first Warner cartoons where the kind of proto Bugs appears, and then you see the final version that whatever they're making now, you're like, oh, that's a huge evolution. It's the same with the Matt Groening's Simpson Minutes that he made for the Tracy Ullman Show and Simpsons Today. But I think my trip was like a particularly weird one because Arnold was even made of clay for a while. So Mary saw that comic strip. Totally, the comic strip was drawn in the early 90s after I'd made the claymation shorts, and I was drawing those strips kind of in my mind like, could this be a show? And it was different though. He was kind of living in the suburbs then. He was still small. He was like 5 or something. And Arnold, by the time he got to the Nicktoons, he was a 9-year-old fourth grader. And now he lived in the inner city and his parents were gone. And now he was living with these grandparents. So you could almost say that's not even the same character, except it was. It's just always an avatar for me, that somebody that I felt like when I was little. And even though none of that really reflects my life at all, like he was living in a much cooler city than Seattle or Portland. It was more New Yorky and stuff. And I that's just, you get the opportunity every time they gave me another chance to make the next thing. I was like, oh, thank God I got some work and I can make something. And so, I was just trying to, when I got the chance to make Hey Arnold, the mid 90s, when Mary offered me that gig, I was like, I got to step up. I got to make this thing really, really detailed now. That was the main thing. And I think that was it. It was like, well, he can't be a 5-year-old who doesn't talk. That's not going to work. I actually thought I'll make him 4th grade. He's right in the middle of the kids who are my audience. He won't be in 6th grade. He won't be in 1st grade. He'll be in 4th grade, like right in the middle, and kind of like reach the maximum kid audience. That's what I was thinking.
Cool. All
Hope
right.
that answers your question.
It does. It does a lot, actually. Thank you.
You bet. I'm glad you're all love the art of animation, and whatever your goals, if you just want to love it and learn about it or do it, it's all the same to me. That we love animation because it's so great, and I feel like we're in the best time ever to look at good animation, right? Like you can go on the streamers now, you can see the history of Disney. And I just realized that I was not aware. I always felt bad, like, why don't they have better access to the whole library of the Warner cartoons? HBO Max, if you look up Looney Tunes on HBO Max, you can watch them all from the 30s. I don't know how far it's gone. I'm in the middle of it now, and just like, oh man, geeking out so hard because it's this shit is the best, and it's now 60, 70, 80 years old, whatever. It's the best. And so we live in a time now where everybody can sit at home and or on their computer and watch everything. So it's the best time to be an animation buff ever.